Hey guys, it's Evan Bourcier, back to do part 2 of this Patreon critique, which has sort of slipped away from me in the midst of podcast recording and stuff, so I apologize for that. Beneath this post, though, you guys can post your submissions immediately for the next critique, because I want to get right on that, and I've had a few people ask it already, so if you have something else that you want checked out, comment below this post, and I'll get to it as soon as possible. I usually give like a week or two for people to get all their stuff in, and then I'll go through it all. But anyway, I want to get right into this for the sake of making it an efficient use of all your time. I wanted to quickly address sort of the thoughts on the thoughts. I appreciated Austin's response and a little bit of context about the whole thing. I feel like I hope that I wasn't too harsh on that piece, but I feel like it sounded like Austin had a pretty good response to it and a pretty good sense for it. I think that the thing that I wanted to say is that I agree that we all have bad projects. So that's part of what I feel like going through these critiques is worth saying, is that like I work on projects that you're trying to just make the best out of what you're given, and I'd never want to show it to anyone and you hide it and you're not proud of it. And I appreciate people's willingness to sort of present those projects here to get some sort of third party perspective on maybe what could be done differently. But I would definitely say that you shouldn't expect every project to be great or to be your favorite, or, you know, sometimes there's jobs you just do for the money, or there's jobs that you just do for the experience. And I think one of the key things is trying to take some sort of lesson away from every one of those jobs. So I feel like Austin took some good things away from this job, which definitely makes it worth doing, in my opinion, even if it's not real footage or whatever. Everyone else had good thoughts too, but I'm going to skip along those and get right into this. Let's go.
When the road is called up yonder, 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 I'll be there.
Did I tell you that Jesus came to be with my husband right before he died? I asked him, because he was a real good patient, and I said, "Hon, what's going on?" And he said, "Jesus Christ in all of his glory, he's here, he's come to get me." I said, "Well, what's he saying?" And he said, "Nothing, just being around him is wonderful." He waited a few minutes and he said, "Hon, whether you know it or not, I'm dying." He had just got out of a retreat, and this was the last gift that my husband gave me. And they made it at that retreat. They all had cancer, and he said they were so giving and kind because they were going through the same thing. Well, it was quite terrible because I had took care of him for 3 years, and so I was very tired. It was like losing a part of myself, but that gave me comfort, you know, that the Lord had came to get him. But the loneliness, it was an actual hurt, and I cried for a whole year. That's another thing about being a widow. I have to leave part of my groceries out in the car till I feel like bring them in. He's so happy. That was the day that we moved up there to Palestine, and he was helping me plant flowers. And he built our cabin. It was a little 2-story cabin. It was snowing when these were made. That was our little cabin in Elkhart. My son got killed. He was 18. He was in an accident. And it was a shock because it was sudden. I had it worse trying to get through my husband's death because he was my sweetheart, the love of my life. My grandkids are wonderful, but they've got their work. Then your children, they've got a busy life. They don't mean to, and I think I did the same thing with my in-laws, and you just don't have the company, and they're busy. This life is busy. You don't have people to come around. It's just rough being by yourself. That's just all there is to it. And you'd think, it's been a long time, you would think you would get used to being lonely, but you don't.
So, and some things were going on with Maddie, who I see at the nursing home.
Yeah.
So, that has to come first because
Before me?
takes. Yeah, I love you, but
Not that much, huh?
love you, Betty. But let me be honest with you.
You're not all that great.
My husband said, "Well, why don't you work with the widows?" Thought that was funny because I really don't have a lot of patience, and so I just couldn't see that. My husband was saying, "Why don't you go talk to Brother Charles?" So I had a meeting with Brother Charles and talked to him and told him that if there's a need that he needs me to fill in the church, I would love to help. And he said, "Yes, we do have a need." And I said, "Well, what is it?" And he said, the widows. And so I asked him right away, I said, did you talk to my husband? Because he's the one who told me I should work with the widows. And he said, "No, I haven't talked to your husband." And so I said, "Well, let me pray about that." So I was going home, and on the radio they were, it's a Christian station, and they were talking about the widows. And so it kind of surprised me, and I said, "Oh man, this is what God wants for me. I don't see it. I don't know why me." And then I heard God's voice say, "Why not?" Seeing people in the nursing home that didn't have any family members to come see them, seeing how their independence is gone, it was a lot of loneliness there. I started to get really depressed. I mean, it was just, I was getting so down. I want to take on everybody's burden. And so, and I had to turn it over to God, it was really hard. So God was just working on me too. I'm helping the widows, but really, they're teaching me something about myself. And then finally God got me through that. I turned it over to him, and I prayed, and Brother Charles prayed with me. And I've learned that now I can be their voice is what I could be.
I'm looking at my flowers out there. I can see my roses from the window. They're so pretty. Not the flower beds I used to have, but I still love my flowers. And after I retired, I had a brick home out on the lake. And after I retired, I knew I couldn't afford it. So I sold it and got a smaller place. So I've just learned to adjust as I've gotten older. And as you get older and your income is not as much as it was, you learn to adjust, and that you don't need a lot of things that you thought you did when you was younger.
I didn't know there was that much loneliness out there, and there is. 15 minutes is enough for them because they don't really know time anymore. That's all different to them. But they do know when somebody comes by and grabs their hand and gives them a hug and tells them, "Hey, I want you to know I'm praying for you today." Or to ask them, "Is there anything I can do for you?" We live in a society where we're busy all the time. They don't ask for much. They just ask for a little bit of love, just a little bit of your time.
Like in Palestine, I had these widows. At Christmas time, I'd bake cookies and a small gift, and that may be all they would get. I felt like I was the one that was really privileged and blessed because I would see their face, how they enjoyed getting the Christmas things.
Starting this is that so many doors have opened. Meeting more widows, people that don't go to our church. It's allowed me to witness to people outside of the church even. Seems like once you go out there in the world and you tell them what you're doing, you see the needs. And then people don't want to hear you turn them down. It's just, that's how busy I'm getting from the phone calls. People needing help. You know, some of the widows at the nursing home are not saved. You know, God's called me to share the gospel with them. One lady there that has asked me, you know, if Myrtle was my mother. And I said, no, she's a friend of mine from church, and God's called me to watch over the widows. She hadn't been to church. She had never been to church. So I shared the gospel with her. And then her daughters came in, and I shared the gospel with them. They accepted Christ at that time, and they were so happy. Since then, she has passed away, and so I know. I smile now because I know where she is. Oh, I wish y'all could have been there for that. Oh, gosh. That was awesome. What I really want to see is there's not one widow alone. I don't want them to ever feel that feeling alone. My dreams are is to have every hour somebody go by, every widow, that there's always someone there for them. But to have that, I need more volunteers. And I have a lot of love to give, and I want to give it to all these beautiful widows that bring so much joy to my heart. I really do.
From Paris or wherever we are. From Paris or wherever we are.
The Lord works in mysterious ways. You help someone when you're younger, and it'll come back tenfold in your later years.
Wow. Okay, so I'm going to attempt to keep my thoughts brief in the spirit of keeping this watchable. Overall, I would say that I dig this. I thought it was a cool story told well. I watched it. I didn't really feel like I had to click away, which is more than I can say about a lot of other like 10-minute videos. And I totally get the struggle of like doing sort of a doc style thing like this and trying to make it look good. Sort of reminds me of like the time frame of the Dale Black Discovering Heaven documentary that I worked on last year. If you haven't seen that, I believe the link's currently in the in my Instagram bio, and if it's not, drop me a message. But we've done breakdowns on that and stuff. But so I totally feel the tension, and so I say that everything that I say as someone who gets it, and I'm not expecting it to be perfect, so I'm probably identifying things that you already know, but still attempting to sort of identify and add my own sort of spin. I sort of felt like the opening was a little abstract and maybe a little over dramatic compared to the rest of the piece, but that's just me. The rest of the stuff looks pretty good, but I felt like that initial drone shot and the like singing was a little... because he didn't really know what to expect. So probably I'd find people with differing opinions. Overall, and this is a personal quirk of mine, I don't like seeing people fight image stabilization, and I feel like it's a pretty consistent theme in this. I feel like it helps you definitely sometimes, but the little kicks and jerks and stuff, I'd personally rather just see straight handheld. That's me. Some people may disagree, but that's why I don't generally use image stabilized lenses when shooting handheld. Overall, look like I dug a lot. I think there's a lot of good shots. There's a lot of pretty light. Something that stood out to me really early on was I feel like the interview pulls very green at the beginning here. And then a lot of the other stuff pulls a lot more magenta. And it's not, I don't even necessarily like dislike either look, but I think putting them side by side makes it really apparent. And when you have like skin tone shifts within a piece, I feel like that's something that can be really jarring. Excuse me. Like specifically like that shot into that shot, like you go from a very green skewed skin tone to a very magenta skewed skin tone. And so that sort of bothered me a little. I would probably try to meet them in the middle a little bit. Because I tend to skew a little bit on the green side naturally, but I think this green might be a bit on the over green side. There's some moments that I think are good moments. I do struggle sometimes with the like, how much do you skew towards the moment versus how much do you try to preserve the charade of like that things aren't being orchestrated. So like the light moving in this and the exposure change sort of took me out of it a bit. I would probably try and like cover that and cut around it somehow and then maybe come back into the scene. But yeah, the super darkness of this with like it's pretty flatly lit and there's like this snap zoom and stuff definitely felt very different than everything else in a way that took me out of it a little bit. I'm not necessarily against those moments of imperfection. I actually really like them. I just feel like the way that played out, and there's a few other times, like I think it's over here that there's an exposure shift as she's going through the pictures. And it's like, in my opinion, most of the time, if you're shooting something like that, I think it's right here. Yeah. It's like both of those exposures were fine. You just got to pick one and stick with it because otherwise you're sort of shooting yourself in the foot or shooting your editor in the foot, depending on what you're doing. But if I did have that situation, I'd probably cut around it personally or try to find some other way to hide it. But yeah, generally in these sort of like sexy doc situations, if a moment's happening, you just got to own whatever you've got. And if there's nothing like critically wrong with your exposure and stuff, I'd rather just leave it than sort of have to break the moment. In general, otherwise, I dug things. I feel like in this sort of kitchen scene, wherever it went, this one, this light is really unmotivated. Because it's like you have a clear light source here and then you have this sort of hard light source coming from the ceiling over here, and it doesn't really make sense to me, so it feels pretty lit compared to other stuff. In general, I really like the tones and sort of vibe of the piece. Like the interviews look good. The tonality is pretty consistent. I'm also personally not a big lifted black guy, which I think I've said in the past, but it's just sort of immediately tends to take me out of it because it just feels like a color graded piece rather than like feeling natural. So I personally avoid it like the plague. But some people really dig it, and totally your prerogative. There are definitely a few audio things that stood out to me. Like I feel like in this lady's interview, there's a few times that you can hear like a noise reduction filter opening and closing, some automated noise reduction. And that bothered me a little bit. I'd probably prefer to either leave it or do it a little more cleanly. There's a few times that like this shot whips at the very end and then cuts. Boof. And it's like I would just cut around that personally because I think it's sort of a jarring experience for the viewer. And like anytime that I'm going to let the viewer in on the fact that like this is a thing that's being made, I want it to be for a reason. And anytime that there's no good reason, like I want to protect the illusion. And so like I feel like there are a few times that maybe the illusion is broken and I don't see why that's necessary, but I do know the tension of like having moments that are hard to cut around and not having enough B-roll and stuff. But that's part of why, in my mind, the consistent shot beats the flashy shot in doc stuff. So you have to try to find that balance between like, well, how do I not whip the camera around and, whatever else, have exposure changes and whatever else while getting what I want. And so sometimes I pick something a little bit safer that isn't necessarily super dramatic, but you got to sort of know those moments of when you can push it and when you cannot. There's also one narrative moment with this lady around this part that I thought was weird. It's this exact one. And it's where she's talking about, like, she says about how, like, she passed away, but I know where she is now. It's also unclear to me whether she's talking about exactly this lady or someone else. And then she says, like, let me see.
Since then, she has passed away. And so I smile now because I know where she is. Oh, I wish y'all could have been there for that. Oh, gosh. That was awesome.
that little quote is really confusing to me, because I honestly don't know if she's talking about like, I wish I could have been there when she died. Oh gosh, because that was awesome. I'm not sure, or if she's like talking about when she came to know Jesus, or like what exactly she's referring to. But it just struck me as really like, what? Like she thought this lady dying was awesome. So I probably would cut that out personally. I do like the emotion of the moment, but the message is a little confusing to me. Otherwise, I liked it. I felt like this color grade shift to the like vintage thing was a little unnecessary at the end and a little tacky, honestly, compared to everything else. And I didn't love this text treatment just because, again, it didn't feel consistent with the rest of the piece. I feel like the rest of the piece has this very modern, cinematic doc feel, and then it sort of transitions into this like old silent film type thing, and it just sort of felt unnecessary to me. But overall, I dug it again, and I understand the pain, so only love for me, but those are sort of my notes on that one. Ooh, funky flares. What? Oh, there we go. These are cool flares. I'd love to know what lenses this was shot on. Sort of Panavision-esque. Okay, so I have some thoughts on this one. Without, knowing too much about the context, I guess I'll just offer what I can. I feel like I get what you're going for, but to be totally honest, I don't really get the point of this story. So I would highly recommend, from a story perspective, like doing some research into what makes a good story, and something as simple as like 3-act structure, whether that's beginning, middle, end, introduction, conflict resolution, and you can get deeper from there. But like, I feel like this story doesn't really have much of that. It's just sort of like, this guy's a pizza guy. This girl wants him to come over. He hits a dude and he buries the dude. The end. And it's like, I don't care about that story. I don't really care about him. I don't care about the guy he hit. He doesn't really seem to go through any kind of struggle, and there's nothing interesting that happens to him at any point in the story, which may sound like a harsh judgment, but that's really like, at the end of the day, that's what you got. And so things like making it so that it's like, if the pizza guy is our main character, like, how are we developing him as a character and like making the audience want to empathize with him? If our big conflict is that like he hit this guy, what is sort of his conflict with that? Because he doesn't really seem to have any struggle. He just sort of like sees him, throws him in the trunk, immediately buries him. And it's like, is that what would normally happen in that scenario? Like, maybe an interesting development of the story would be him sort of debating what to do, and coming to a conclusion, because that gives you conflict that develops him as a character. It shows struggle, and him just sort of having this, like, hit a guy, decided to throw him in the trunk immediately and bury him, is like, it's a pretty linear and honestly just like undynamic and uninteresting narrative. So that would be my sort of fundamental flaw to this thing, is that it takes 4 minutes to not say much. And again, I hopefully that isn't too harsh, but that's sort of the way that I look at these kinds of things, the way that I look at my own work. So one book that I would highly recommend is called Save the Cat. You can get the ebook on Amazon, and it's cheap, and it's sort of like basic screenwriting. And even though I don't really plan to be a feature screenwriter, which is most of what it's about, I feel like there are a lot of really good concepts that I can take into all of my work, whether that's commercial branded content or anything. So I highly recommend checking that out. Now, from like a visual perspective, I would basically say that all my thoughts come down to like night exteriors are the hardest thing to sign yourself up for without a budget, because you just can't control much. And I feel like this sort of suffers from that. There's not much that you can see on the car interior. There's this weird switch too, where this definitely feels like the overhead light in the car is just on, which is sort of unusual to begin with from like a lighting motivation point. And then it switches over here to now all of a sudden there's light coming from like the ground next to him. And I'm not really sure why that happens, but both feel like pretty unmotivated light sources to me. And it's tough because, like, especially in this shot, like, he covers himself up half the time, so you can't really see much. I also felt like the sort of gag with him hitting someone was tough because I didn't even really know what had happened originally, honestly. I thought he was hitting another car. The person walking isn't really introduced. It's just sort of like him driving, looking at the road. This shot, which is unclear to me whether it's his car or another car. Cut back to the interior. And I think this light passing is part of what made me think that maybe there was another car, that there was like a headlight reflection. And then he just sort of like freaks out. There's this shot, which is more or less of nothing, right here. And then this. I feel like him not saying anything sort of becomes overplayed as a device too. Like, it goes from there being some like good reason or it feeling like a thing to it just feels like we didn't want to write any lines, and so he like artificially just sort of mumbles the whole time. I also would say that a general piece of advice I have regarding this is, and this is something that Nicholas Matthews talked about in the most recent episode of the podcast, which you should go and check out. But he was quoting someone else, and I forget who. But basically, the paraphrase quote is that, like, when you look at a sequence ask how many shots you need to tell that sequence, and that's exactly how many shots you should have, not more, not less. And I feel like there are a lot of shots in these sequences that I feel like are sort of unnecessary, and don't serve a whole lot of purpose, to be honest. So like this shot's cool, like it's a cool composition. It's tough from a lighting perspective again, because nighttime exteriors are tough. And like that shot sort of makes sense, cut to showing the guy lighting stuff, because you can't see much. So optimally, you'd sort of try to draw some more attention to this guy, whether with some edge light or something. Then this shot is interesting. I sort of get the like wacky thing, but then it cuts to like the same exact shot, almost slightly wider and not slowed down. And then it cuts to this, and it's just sort of this like jump cutty thing. Then there's this shot, which I honestly have no clue what this is. I'm not sure if it's supposed to be blood, but since the tail lights are on, it sort of just looks like water. And so it's sort of just a random shot of the sidewalk. Back to the guy. And like in this whole sequence, which also then jump cuts around, because like he takes his hand off his head, starts walking over, hands are back on head, freaking out, goes back to the guy, flips the guy over, pukes, goes back to scratching his head, back to puking, back to looking at the car. It's just sort of like all over the place. And if I was sort of blocking a scene like this and figuring it out, I would be going through, okay, so we just hit the guy. Like, what do we have to communicate now? And to me, order of priority is probably like, communicate that the guy is there, because he's a little undefined up to this point. Communicate the pizza boy's state emotionally, about hitting the guy. Then maybe communicate the guy's state as he sort of revealed, which sort of happens when he gets flipped over. And then communicate the decision-making process. So you could go this shot, maybe you cut to him walking over, tight of pizza guy, because then you sort of cut to his POV, his hands go on his head. You cut to sort of this shot of the body on the ground. Cut back to pizza guy, who's sort of freaking out, and flips the guy over. Again, this is already turning into sort of a complicated sequence to me. Or maybe you just cut to a wide and show him flipping the guy over. So it's tight of the pizza guy walking. He looks down, puts his hands on his head, tight of the guy laying on the ground. Cut back out to that wide symmetrical shot you have. Flips the guy over and pukes. Like that would be sort of a interesting gag in the wide, is sort of you get the body flip and then the puke all in one shot. And then now we cut back into pizza guy as he's sort of going through like, what do I do? Whatever else. And then we move to execution. So that's sort of like how I would cut this from what's currently like a 14 shot sequence or more into a shorter sequence. And anything that isn't conveying critical information generally doesn't have to be there, in my opinion. So then we get to this moment, which again just sort of involves a lot of unnecessary shots, in my opinion. You have this jump cut on the wide from the back. Then there's this tight where you don't really see much of anything. Then back to the same wide. Back to another tight where you can't see a whole lot of anything. And then he shuts the trunk. And that's another, like, in my mind, 2 or 3 shot sequence. That it's like, once we've conveyed he's sort of sitting there at the door and debating what to do, then maybe we cut back out to the wide, because again the wide is sort of funny, and show him dragging the guy and start putting him in, and then maybe we just cut to a medium of him like shutting the trunk, and that's all we need to really show in that moment. The rest of this sort of like him struggling is just sort of awkward to me, and it's not really dramatic, it's not really funny, it's not like, I don't really know what the genre of the piece is supposed to be and what I'm supposed to feel, but it just feels like I'm seeing a lot of stuff and I'm not knowing how I'm supposed to feel about it. So then we get out here, and again it's just sort of what are we trying to say? Because it's a lot of, gets to this place, pulls the body out, and then just sort of goes to town, dig in for a minute and a half, and nothing really happens. And so he sort of looks at the guy, which you can also see the guy breathing, which sort of bothered me. I don't know if it's this shot or the other one. There's definitely, I think it's this. Yeah, you can totally see the guy breathing there, which sort of bugged me. But yeah, it's just like him digging. He's tired. He looks at the guy. Guy's still dead. Comes back to him. He's digging, tired. Goes back to the guy. Guy's still dead. But there's no like payoff even for, oh, he's digging forever. And then, this thing happens or whatever. There's no interruption. Like maybe he gets a phone call and it has to sort of like talk his way out of what he's doing or something. There's really nothing that happens in this minute and a half that is interesting per se. It's just sort of this really drawn out sequence of him digging a hole and throwing a guy in a hole, the end. So I would sort of try to develop that more, and then again try to just make your sequences concise in the purpose that they serve. So those are sort of my thoughts. Hopefully, again, that's not too harsh, but I've been there, done that, and just feel sort of like you're wandering through and just sort of trying to you're just trying to figure it out. Oh, Helios 58, cool flares. But I mean, overall, I think there's some good ideas in there, and I think that it's just an issue of practice. Sort of the thing Austin said, not everything has to be great. Sometimes it's just a learning process, and I certainly am not a narrative expert, and so I don't know that I would expect too much out of like any narrative shorts that I did. Next up. What? Vimeo breaks itself like every 5 minutes. Ooh, excuse me. Okay, I feel like I can pretty quickly and easily sum up my thoughts on this one. I mean, first off, I would say that it generally looks good. There are a few big sort of like red flags to me. Red flag number one is if you're going to set up like this super symmetrical shot, try to at least have it actually symmetrical because it sort of dutches off to the right a little bit and these straight lines aren't straight, which bothers me. Thing number two, I think this spot would benefit a ton from sound design. And so having like the sound of her running in and talking and putting these things down, because the just like disembodied long shot is sort of disengaging for me. I also think that this moment to me, like I see what you're going for, but it's a little strong. Like no one ever just makes that face at a glass of water. And so again, if you had some kind of sound or something where she's like, Mom, like, I don't know, even just that, even just being like, ugh, like, but I sort of feel like, I don't know, it's another one of those conceptual things where it's like, if in the concept process of figuring out this piece, if your concept is kids don't like water, but kids like milk, buy our milk. Yeah, I don't know. That's a little bit of a tough one. I would maybe be inclined to find some other way around that, honestly. But if this was what we had to go with, you know, I would say that like, maybe even playing up the reason like why she's having water, as some sort of like, if you have a perceived conflict that's like you're used to having to drink water because you're worried about this, this, and this, but our milk solves that, and here's why, is sort of a logical pitch that makes sense to me. But I feel like the idea of like, the way it reads to me again is sort of like kids don't like water, but they do like milk. Give them our milk. Is like there's no real reason for me to buy your product other than kids like it, which is sort of a weak narrative for me. So again, I would sort of try to probably push that, or just try to refine it a little, which to me is a big part of the process, is going like, okay, so what can we do? Like, maybe she's like, what's for lunch? And Mom's like, peanut butter and jelly. And she's like, oh, my favorite. She's like, can I have, maybe she goes like, and milk? And Mom's like, oh no, we're out. And then the girl's like, aw. And then, you know, you come back next time, And she's like, it's time for your favorite. And she's like, peanut butter and jelly? And the mom's like, yeah, with milk. I don't know. Like, you have to have some kind of like motivation for this change and stuff. Because currently it doesn't really make sense to me that it's like, here's a plate and some water. And she's like, I hate water, Mom. You know I hate water. And then she comes back and she's like, now I'm going to play with my chalk or whatever this is. But I'm depressed about playing with the chalk. I really don't mean to like mockingly laugh. It's really funny to me when you take short form things and try to like break it down, because sometimes it does just sound ridiculous. My work included. I hate sitting here and playing with the stuff that I just brought to the table. And I was like, water? No. We'll pull out this lactose-free milk. And I'm going to bring you a sandwich. I'm not sure what this has to do with the sandwich. The girl's always like bringing stuff to the table while Mom serves her lunch, which again is sort of a weird device to me. And then she's like, milk. And she's like, now she doesn't even like the peanut butter and jelly, which last time she was amped about PB&J. Now she's like, oh, I'm still depressed about having to drink water. And then she's like, but wait, there's milk. And the girl like freaks out. Thanks, Mom. You really do love me. And then they play outside because the girl doesn't hate her life anymore. Yeah, I mean, that's honestly, like, again, not trying to be harsh, but to me, that's the weak spot of this piece is like visually, I think the execution's fine. The lighting's fine. You know, a lot of the art direction's fine, but it just sort of feels like a not super strong spot to me because the concept doesn't really hit me anywhere. I also sort of feel like the 2-3-5 crop is really unnecessary for this spot. I don't know why I would say that, but it just feels like the kind of thing that maybe makes more sense to be 16:9. But lighting and the grade are good and clean for what it is. Angle's a little off, and the concept's just a little on the weak side to me, and a little cheesy. And as a customer, like, there's nothing about this spot for me that makes me want to buy that at the end of the day. Because I'm like, well, my kids aren't depressed, so I don't need to buy them this milk. And, you know, it's only after rewatching it that I noticed that it's lactose-free, which I assume is part of the problem. So maybe that's even your... maybe that's your conflict and resolution, is like, girl comes to have her PB&J, and she's like, can I have milk? And Mom's like, no, you know, it gives you heartburn or something. And then, you know, you sort of have a transition of time, which, to be totally honest, the like fade to black isn't my favorite transition of time element, because it's just sort of like and now it's later. But having some kind of a moment, maybe Mom goes to the store, grabs this milk, and that's when you can sort of see the like lactose free thing, comes back, and, you know, it's a later day, and girl goes, hey, can I have PB&J? And Mom's like, yeah, sure. And then she brings her the glass of milk, and she's like, it's lactose free and you can drink it. And then they're like, oh yeah, you know, like, I don't know, again, I feel stupid explaining this, but trying to sort of tie into the upsides of the product what your narrative is. And I feel like it's probably like 70% of the way there, but that last 30% is what really makes it compelling. So yeah, that's about all I got on that one. Play. You can do it. Doink, doink, doink. Oops.
Is this it? Is this the pinnacle of what life has to offer? Isn't Christmas the most wonderful time of year where spirits peak and peace on earth prevails? We deck the halls and joy to the world. People even put
I'll let it buffer.
antlers on their car for crying out loud. Or do I feel like the butt of the joke, going from here to there, stress upon stress upon stress? I need a gift receipt. It's buying gifts for my son that he'll play with for about 4 days and then he'll leave in his room somewhere. It's making a meal that my mother-in-law will actually like. So I burned the turkey once 10 years ago. It was 10 years ago. I digress. There's gotta be more, right?
There
I'm sorry, but I couldn't help to overhear you talking to yourself. There is more to life. You should come to Christmas at Crossway.
Christmas at Crossway?
Yeah, come and see.
This Christmas, Crossway has 8 Christmas services to choose from. Go to christmas@crossway.com for more information.
This way! It's this way! I promise it's this way! Come!
Yeah! I mean, I guess my sort of like quick overall thoughts on this would be that I feel like the first half of the piece seems like it's taking itself seriously, and the second half of the piece totally isn't. So I would maybe try to unify that a little bit. And like, if the front's going to sort of be this like serious thing of this woman's take on the holidays, and sort of her like frustration with it, then I feel like the ending should probably sort of like address that. And I feel like she's like, this is what's tough, and this is what's tough, and this is what's tough. And then the guy's like, you should come to church. And she's like, yeah. And it's like, well, it doesn't address any of that. Like, if the guy at least said like this and this and this, you know, if he sort of like addressed what she was saying, I feel like that that could help. But it's sort of like this weird turn to me that falls a little flat on the, like, I don't understand why anything that she was saying really has anything to do with me wanting to go to church at the end of it, honestly. Other than that, I mean, the gimbal shot looks good. It back focuses a few times, which is the tough thing with like autofocus on gimbals. It's also, I feel like the headroom's a little excessive. I would probably come down with the whole gimbal like 2 feet so that you're sort of in the middle of her body and her head's closer to the top of the frame, because it just feels a little bit overly high right now. I'm not sure where this light is coming from, but it almost feels like an on-camera light, which it may very well be, but I'd probably avoid on-camera lighting because it just feels really newsy, and I feel like this piece isn't designed to feel newsy. But other than that, I mean, the general context of everything is okay. His audio is a little rough compared to hers. But yeah, I mean, that's sort of my biggest thing. It's just like solidifying concept a little to make it a cleaner, like, what are we conveying and why? And how does that lead people to what we're sort of doing as a call to action? So if it's, hey, come to church for Christmas, why should they come to church for Christmas? And then how does our video address that? And I'm a little unclear on sort of like what the thought behind that was on this video.
I sat in my car for a little bit, I had $7 on me. I was gonna use that to buy bologna sandwiches for my family. I had just enough gas to make it through the week. Maybe not the whole week, but I was gonna try. I was kind of questioning, you know, my existence and my purpose and what was going on, what did I do wrong, and this was it.
I had quit my job and decided to start my own business. I had a shop in the mall, and I did that for probably about 6 months. But then I realized I was just making enough just to pay my shop's rent. And with that, it threw my family into just a downward spiral.
I had to make a decision, I had to make a choice. My last faith in God, I can go to United Way, and I was like, well, if I go this way and they don't have food, then I'm stuck. So I said, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna go over there.
We were in survival mode. We needed help. I ended up seeking assistance actually from the Homeless Coalition. I utilized Manna Food Bank. I did not know that they were partners of United Way.
This lady, she set a box on the table, and they bought another box and then another box. And it was filling these 3 boxes up with food. And I put everything in my car and I just cried, you know, because the burden was lifted and I can actually get back to work.
People say somebody needs to do something, but what people don't realize is that somebody starts with them.
Every individual, if they want to serve, we can find a a capacity they can serve in.
I just feel like once you find your niche of what you can do to help your community, that's where you should excel.
There's always somebody, something, somewhere that needs help. And so the more people we get involved, the better we can make Pensacola.
Not only do we have a significant amount of need in this community, but we also have an incredible amount of support that comes from the community, not just on an individual level, but business owners and larger partners.
We work with the United Way to see which agencies have a need, and then we try and look and say, well, what skill set do we have here at Gulf Power?
There's so many ways to get involved with the United Way. All you have to do is just call us and we can match you with the agency or field that fits best with your interests.
Day of Caring is awesome because Day of Caring, everybody in our whole county comes together and they go do projects.
Being able to stand in a gymnasium with a group of volunteers and see the thousands of supplies that we get in from across the community, it's awe-inspiring.
So if we can do all that in one day, imagine what we can do in 365 days.
United Way has actually helped me see everything that's going on in the community and to see what really needs to change.
When you volunteer for an organization like United Way, you're volunteering for something that's bigger than yourself.
All people need is a chance, just a little bit. And that's what United Way provides, just that little bit of like, you know, it's just so good about what they do.
Cool. I dig it. Okay, so sort of some quick thoughts. Mostly have to do with like visual consistency. I like the concept. I like the sort of narrative and the execution. It's snappy and it moves along.
For my family.
I feel like it starts off pretty visually dramatic, with like this car sequence. And then this shot, you know, it's pretty like moody. This is pretty moody. This is moody. Like it's all sort of abstract. And then it cuts to this, which is very like corporate-y lit to me, and is pretty consistently out of focus compared to the rest of the piece. So, and then like this shot, like another super moody shot right next to super bright interview. So that's sort of one thing I would say that I feel like is consistently like it jumps around between sort of this moody aesthetic, even this being more on the moody side of things, and like this is pretty bright and happy, this is pretty bright and happy, this is more moody, I would say. This lady's interview is pretty consistently out of focus too. It's just something to be careful with. Sometimes just stopping down to like a 2 or a 2.8 helps a lot. And then this is pretty like corporate feeling and less natural to me. This is really moody and dramatic, looks good. This is really sort of bright and high key again. Moody and cinematic. Moody enough, moody enough, moody enough. Super moody, flary. This stuff's definitely more doc feeling, but it's fine. This feels like it was lit to me. I feel like you could probably help that by pulling the output of whatever this light is down like 15% and or throwing a little diffusion on it, just to make it a little bit softer. Maybe it's not lit, but it definitely feels lit. This looks great. This is again super sort of dramatic, cinematic style. This shot is soft. This shot's fine. This lady seems to have the only short-sighted interview, which sort of bothers me because usually that's a narrative device for like dis-ease. Unless is the other guy short-sighted too? No, he's not. Yeah, so her interview being randomly short-sighted bothered me because I couldn't figure out why. And I feel like her key light is a little bit hard too. So I would probably throw a little bit of like a 4x of diffusion or something just to soften some of these shadows so that you don't have quite as hard an edge on everything. I like the composition and like the overall tone. But I feel like if you just threw like a 4x or 6x of diffusion on whatever your key light is, you'd be money. And I'd probably not short side her. You know, that's me. This looks good. This again feels very like lit corporate interview, which is a fine style, but feels to me in contradiction with a lot of the aesthetic of the rest of the piece. It also really bothers me that that she's like covering up the sign and that there's all this white space over here. I would definitely sort of take a half step to the left and try to kick the sign out from eating into her head, because you sort of have all this center weighted darkness and then all this white space on the edges of the frame. And it starts to get there even over here, but I would probably take another step to the left and maybe a step back to give enough room for that sign to live. And her too, I would probably either like add some diffusion to soften this up, and or maybe throw a little bit of just a little bounce in so that this doesn't go all the way out to clipping, so that it feels a little more natural, like the other stuff in the video does. This shot of the like bridge really felt like a shot of nothing to me. Didn't really have anything to do with what they're talking about.
Not just on an individual level, but business owner.
Like, not just on an individual level.
Not just on an individual level.
Shot of graffiti on a bridge. Don't quite get it. Not really. I don't know. Just doesn't seem story coherent to me. It's not really an overly interesting shot to begin with. Like, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to look at here. But that was like a real departure to me from the rest of the thing, because you don't see any of that like visual incoherence everywhere else. But this really felt like just sort of like, we gotta throw something there. This is a shot. This looks awesome. This is like real footage right here.
Larger partners.
We work with the United Way to see which agencies have a need, and then we try and look and say, well, what skill set do we have here at Gulf?
This interview looks great. I think, again, you can see how just having a little bit of fill on this side of the guy really makes it feel a lot more natural. It definitely still feels a little lit and like intentional, but it's more natural than like the lady in front of the other sign was. And the sign plays okay. Again, I'd probably go up a few inches with camera and just try to kick it a little cleaner than it is in this, because you're sort of shooting up at him, I feel like, and the sign falls down here. Probably come up just a little bit, tilt down a little bit, and bring the sign more up into this space, because it sort of just bothers me that it clips into his shoulder.
There's so many ways to get involved with the United Way.
And then the one other thing, again, this stuff's all pretty cinematic, except for this shot's super soft.
All you have to do is just call us, and
I'm a
we can
stickler
match
for
you
sharp
with
shots.
the agency or field that fits best with your interests.
Day of Caring is awesome because Day of Caring
fits best with your interests.
This shot, I think, also served well by either throwing some diffusion on whatever your fixture is or just dimming it down a little, because it's just very lit compared to a lot of the other stuff.
Because Day of Caring, everybody in our whole county.
Pretty stuff. The flicker in this shot is crazy to me.
Everybody in our whole...
It just honestly felt like I have no clue how this shot made the cut with everything else. Like, this fluorescent on him is not attractive. The flicker's bad. It's just rough. And there's a lot of other really, really good stuff, but your worst shot sort of tends to bring the whole thing down. This looks great.
And they go do projects.
Being able to stand in a gymnasium with a group of...
This is another good example of a more natural feeling interview. The short sighting, again, bothers me because it's just very like uneasy for what it is, but she's sharp. It's awesome. The light's great. Color contrast is cool. I would probably just reframe that interview, but this is the look that I sort of would have been going for consistently. There's a good contrast ratio. There's a little bit of light coming in on your shadow side here, and it just looks good. But the framing's like, it's a little bit Dutched, it's a little bit above her. Like, this is the shot that I would use for someone either talking about something very bad that happened to them or someone who is a bad person, which this lady definitely doesn't seem like she is.
Thousands of supplies that we get in from across the community. It's awe-inspiring.
So if we can do all that in one day, imagine.
Good, but a little soft. I already talked about this lady.
United Way has actually helped me see.
Where's the other shot I'm looking for?
Caring for something that's bigger than yourself. Caring for
this
cool
sequence. Something bigger than yourself seems like a key moment and key thought at the end of the video. Shot of these little birdhouses. Not really sure what that has to do with bigger than yourself. Not really sure what it has to do with the moral of the story. But I feel like this sort of like random B-roll you can get away with in the middle of the video when you're just sort of trying to move things along. But as you're getting to like that end and delivering your key points, I think that's when you gotta like nail the B-roll connection. And this one feels a little random.
All people need is a chance, just a little bit. And that's what United Way provides. Just that little bit of like, you know, it's just so good about what they do. It's just
and then
so
this
good
shot
about
too.
what they do.
It's a great
You
thought.
know, it's just so good about what they do.
Not quite sure what purpose this shot serves. To me, it's just so good at what they do. Logo. Boom. In and out. Sort of back to that earlier thought. How many shots does the sequence need? No more, no less. You don't really need anything after
You know,
that.
it's just so good
Unless it
about
was
what
some
they do.
sort of transitional element, but it doesn't really serve any logical transitional purpose to me here. It's just sort of this random, tight, foreground element-y shot of a lamp. But other than that, I mean, again, like I said, I like it. There's a lot of cool aesthetic in there. Controlling everything can be hard. But I think in general it looks really good. Those are sort of my nitpicky things about what I think would bring it together a little better. Last but not least, we have Keaton's reel. Okay, so first thing I would say is there's some really good stuff in there, dude. It looks great. I think my biggest thought would be that there's some really good work in here, and I would probably push the really good stuff closer to the front, because, like, in my opinion, this shot's good, but it's sort of doc music stuff, you know. To me, looking at a DP's reel, looking at this, it's like someone else lit the thing well, most likely, and you were probably shooting it, which may or may not be the case, but that's usually what these sort of like music type things say to me when they look more doc style like that. So it's like, it doesn't really say a lot to me about your aesthetic. This piece looks good, but it's honestly a little like just sterile and bland to put right here, because there's not a whole lot going on. You know, there's people talking, we don't know what they're saying. It's just sort of this slow slider. So it's not really the most impressive. I think it might be good to have later on in the right place, but it's a little weak for an opening shot. This shot's really cool. And this shot's really cool. And this was sort of the turn. Is like those first two shots, I was like, huh, this is good. And these next shots, I was like, oh, this guy has some really good stuff. And like, in my opinion, you lead with that. You want whoever starts this reel to immediately be like, this guy's good. So you take whatever your hardest hitters are and you front load them. And so like this stuff looks good. This looks really good. I feel like there might be a bit of a over proliferation of like sort of long locked off narrative shots that are just sort of not a lot going on, honestly. And so they show a look, but I would probably try and like maybe cut the sequences together a little snappier. You know, another rule of thumb I would say is that we don't want to see people's lips moving any more than necessary in reels, because you can't hear what they're saying. It's just sort of like weird to watch. But yeah, there's some cool moments here, but I feel like a lot of them take a little longer than they need to. Then we wrote background of the music, which was introduced at the first shot left. Then we come back to it, which is sort of weird to me. I would probably try and slam it all together a little more. But this stuff looks really good. Again, it's great sort of like operating footage. This stuff looks really good. I really like that shot of the coach, actually. That's a really cool moment. And the light's great. This stuff feels much less impressive overall to me than like this stuff does. Just the nature of like shooting under the lights. This stuff feels really cinematic. And this stuff feels much more documentary to me. Which could be fine, but it definitely just sticks out as distinctly different to me. This looks like you went and watched a game and shot some game coverage. A lot of this other stuff feels like, you know, you were shooting something very intentionally. This is like the most lit feeling shot of the whole thing, which sort of bothers me. It also like compositionally bothers me that there's a guy behind this guy. Like it seems like it's going for symmetry, but then it's like randomly messy and not actually symmetrical. And like the light on both of them is just really unmotivated and harsh. Didn't bother me as much in the single of this guy, but in the wide, I feel like it's sort of like super spotlighty on them, which you can get away with if like everything's symmetrical and it's very like commercial, you know, perfect moment sort of thing. But the sort of like art direction sloppiness mixed with the super over lighting feels a little bit disjointed to me. This stuff looks great. This looks great. Yeah. Honestly, that's sort of pretty much all my thoughts. I think it's a good length, a lot of good content. I'd maybe kill a few shots, add a few new shots as you can. And that's most of my thoughts there. But really good work, dude. I think it's impressive. I'm excited to see more of your work in the future. So if you have any other projects, you can comment below. Thank you guys for making it to the end of this thing. Again, if you have another project you want critiqued, comment below, and I'll check that out as soon as possible. Listen to the podcast with Nicholas Matthews that I just put up, and I will post details soon on when we will be doing that Q&A, but I do have a post up where you can vote sort of what you think the best time for the live hangout with him would be. I'm excited for more live hangouts, excited to do some more breakdowns. My whole like breakdown plan has honestly gotten a little shortened up due to this whole thing with us moving in less than 2 weeks, but I definitely want to do more with that. And I'm really excited to show you guys what I'm working on with sort of the setup at our new house and how it sort of will help with producing both this content as well as other lighting breakdowns and just like educational content in general. So thank you guys so much for your support. Thank you for watching this, and I will see you guys next time.